I'm Lena Miller, 34, a teacher. My whole family staged a perfect charade. They forced me to be a surrogate for my sister, Clara, telling me she was infertile and that I had to sacrifice my body to save her dream of being a model. They called it a sacrifice and insisted it was the only way my life could matter to them. But then I found the test results from the Ohio Reproductive Health Center. The truth crushed my trust. Clara is fully capable of getting pregnant. The whole tragic show was manufactured because she was afraid gaining weight would ruin her modeling career. They treated me like a docile lamb who would quietly comply. They underestimated a mild-mannered teacher pushed to the edge. I decided the next family gathering would become the stage where their lies finally implode. The scent of burnt sugar and stale coffee hung in the air, a familiar perfume for our Sunday gatherings. It was the smell of obligation, of words left unsaid, and resentment simmering just beneath the surface of my mother's meticulously polished dining table. I traced the rim of my porcelain cup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the clenching in my gut. Across from me, my sister, Clara, radiated a practiced serenity, her hands folded neatly over her impossibly flat stomach. She was the star of this particular show, and I was being cast in a supporting role I never auditioned for. "Lena, honey, you're not drinking your coffee." My mother's voice, sharp and saccharine, cut through the low hum of conversation. She refilled her own cup, her movements precise, a general marshalling her troops. My father, bless his heart, just nodded along, his newspaper a flimsy shield against the impending emotional crossfire. "It's a little bitter this morning, Mom," I said, offering a weak smile. "Nonsense," she chirped. "It's the same blend I always use, you're just distracted." She wasn't wrong. I was distracted by the sheer weight of the expectation that had settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. For weeks, it had been a campaign of whispers and hints, of sad, lingering looks and carefully curated articles about the joys of family left on the coffee table. Today, they were done with subtlety. Today was the day of the grand appeal. "We wanted to talk to you, Lena," Clara began, her voice smooth as silk. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cool, her nails perfectly manicured. She was a vision of curated perfection, a walking, talking lifestyle magazine cover. Her career as a boutique model and local influencer depended on it. "Mark and we've been thinking a lot about the future." Mark, my brother-in-law, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He was a good man, quiet and steady, an architect who seemed more comfortable with blueprints than with my family's intricate emotional schematics. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. "It's about having a baby," my mother interjected, unable to let Clara control the narrative. "Your sister has been through so much. All those tests, the doctors, it's just heartbreaking." She dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin, a practiced gesture of maternal sorrow. "It's true," Clara sighed, her lower lip trembling just so. "The doctors have said, well, they've said it's not going to happen for us. Not naturally." The lie hung in the air between us, thick and cloying. I knew about the doctors. I knew they had found nothing wrong, that they had suggested a host of perfectly viable options. But Clara had her own version of the truth, one that suited her narrative of tragic infertility, a narrative that was now, apparently, my problem to solve. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Clara," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I pulled my hand from under hers. "But there are so many ways to build a family. Adoption, IVF? It's not the same," my father mumbled from behind his paper, his first contribution to the conversation. "Blood is blood." "Exactly, Dad," Clara said, beaming at him. "And that's where you come in, Lena." Here it was, the crescendo. I took a slow breath, steeling myself. "What do you mean?" "We want you to be our surrogate," Clara announced, her voice filled with a manufactured hope that made my skin crawl. "We want you to carry our baby. It would be the most incredible gift, a gift for the whole family." The room fell silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to grow louder, each second a hammer blow against my composure. They all looked at me, their faces a mixture of hope and demand. My mother's eyes were shining with unshed tears. My father had lowered his newspaper, his expression one of solemn expectation. Mark was still studying the wall, his jaw tight. And Clara was smiling, a beatific, confident smile that said she had already won. "That's a lot to ask," I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper. "Is it, though?" my mother pressed, leaning forward. "Think about it, Lena, you're 34, you're a wonderful teacher, yes, but you don't have a husband, no children of your own, your life is so simple. This would give you a purpose, a real, lasting contribution to this family." The words were a physical blow, each one landing with a dull, familiar thud. My simple life, my lack of a husband, my childlessness. All my perceived failings laid bare and repackaged as qualifications for this monumental task. It was my duty, she was implying, the duty of the spinster daughter. "Mom, that's not fair," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "My life has purpose." "Of course it does, dear," she said, her tone dismissive. "But this is different. This is legacy. This is family. We have to stick together to help each other. Clara has a career to think about, a body to maintain. It's her livelihood. You understand that, don't you? The stress of a pregnancy, the changes to her figure, it would be devastating for her professionally. For you, it would just be 9 months. Just 9 months. 9 months of my body not being my own. 9 months of hormones and sickness and physical transformation. 9 months of carrying a child that I would be expected to hand over with a smile, as if it were a casserole I'd baked for a potluck. And for what? So Clara's waistline could remain a marketable 24 inches? I don't know, I said, shaking my head. I need to think about it. What's there to think about? Clara asked, her voice losing its silky edge, replaced now by a sharp note of impatience. It's a simple yes or no, Lena. Are you going to be there for your family, or are you going to be selfish? Selfish. The word was a weapon they had wielded against me my entire life. Any time I had chosen a different path, a different desire, a different dream from the one they had envisioned for me, I was being selfish. Going away to college instead of the local community school was selfish. Taking a teaching job in a low-income district instead of a more prestigious suburban one was selfish. Prioritizing my students, my small apartment, my quiet, simple life over the relentless pursuit of the husband and 2.5 children they thought I should have was the ultimate act of selfishness. My best friend Sarah had warned me this was coming. Sarah, a fiercely independent lawyer who had seen my family's dynamics up close for years, called them emotional vampires. "They'll suck you dry, Lena," she'd said over wine last week. "They see you, happy and whole on your own, and they can't stand it. They have to make you a part of their drama, make your body a means to their end." At the time, I thought she was being overly dramatic. Now, sitting at that table, I felt the truth of her words settle deep in my bones. "This isn't about selfishness, Clara," I said, my voice gaining a bit of strength. "This is about my life, my body." "And my life?" she shot back, her eyes flashing. "What about my dream of being a mother? Are you saying your life is more important than that? More important than Mark's dream of being a father?" She glanced at Mark, a clear command in her eyes. He finally looked at me, his expression pained. "Lena," he began, his voice raspy. "It would mean the world to us, to me." His plea was the most painful of all. I liked Mark. I saw the way he struggled to navigate my family's treacherous waters. But he was asking me to set myself on fire to keep them warm, and he had to know it. "I need time," I repeated, pushing my chair back from the table. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, the sound a screech of protest in the tense silence. "This is not a decision I can make over coffee. I need to go." "Lena, don't you walk away from this," my mother warned, her voice rising. "I'm not walking away," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "I'm going home to think. You've asked me to change the entire course of my life. The least you can do is give me an afternoon to consider it." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out the door, the scent of burnt sugar clinging to my clothes, the weight of their expectations a heavy cloak on my shoulders. As I drove home, the quiet, tree-lined streets of my suburban neighborhood seemed to mock me. They were filled with families, with children riding bikes and parents pushing strollers. It was the life my family wanted for my sister, the life they were demanding I provide for her. But what about my life? What about the family I might want to build one day, on my own terms? The question echoed in the silence of my car, a lonely, defiant drumbeat against the overwhelming roar of familial obligation. The silence of my apartment was a balm after the storm at my parents' house. I sank onto my worn, comfortable sofa, the one my mother always said I should replace with something more adult, and pulled an Afghan over my legs. This was my space, my sanctuary. Every book on the shelves was one I had loved, every piece of art on the walls a memory from a trip or a gift from a friend. It was a life I had built for myself, piece by piece, and I had always thought it was a good life. Now their words echoed in the quiet rooms, painting it as something lacking, something pitiable. A simple life, waiting for a real purpose to be assigned to it. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I flinched. Clara's name flashed on the screen. I ignored it. A moment later, a text message appeared. "I know you're upset. I'm sorry if we came on too strong. I'm just so desperate. Please think about it. It's my only chance." My only chance, the melodrama was suffocating. I tossed the phone onto the cushion beside me and dialed Sarah. She picked up on the second ring. "Well," she asked, no preamble needed. "How did the summoning of the surrogate go?" "They've officially asked," I said, my voice flat. I heard her exhale sharply. "You told them to go to hell, I hope, in the most creative and legally binding way possible." "I told them I needed to think about it." "Lena, no," she groaned. "That's a maybe. You can't give them a maybe. With that family, a maybe is a down payment. What did they say? Lay it on me." The full, unadulterated guilt trip. I recounted the conversation, from my mother's comments about my simple life to Clara's performance of the tragic, barren woman to Mark's pained, coerced plea. "Her career, she's worried about her body because of her career." Sarah's voice was laced with disbelief and fury. "She's a part-time model for a local department store catalog, not Giselle Bündchen. And the nerve of your mother, a real contribution to the family. As if raising hundreds of other people's children for the last 12 years isn't a contribution to society. I am seeing red right now, pure, unadulterated rage on your behalf." "I know," I whispered. It gets under your skin. They know exactly where to press." "Of course they do. They installed the buttons," Sarah retorted. "Listen to me. You are not a vessel. You are not an incubator for hire. And you are not selfish for wanting to keep your own body for yourself. This is your life, Lena, not an extension of theirs. Don't let them bully you into this." We talked for another hour, Sarah methodically dismantling every one of my family's arguments until they lay in ruins, exposed for the manipulative tactics they were. By the time we hung up, I felt a sliver of my own strength returning. The next day at school, the familiar chaos was a comfort. The smell of chalk dust and disinfectant, the high-pitched chatter of first graders, the constant, pressing need for my attention, it all served as a grounding force. My life wasn't simple. It was complex and demanding and deeply rewarding. "Rough weekend?" my colleague David asked as we supervised recess. David was a fellow teacher, a kind-hearted man with a gentle smile and 2 kids of his own, one of whom was adopted. He was one of the few people I could talk to about things without fear of judgment. "You could say that," I said, watching a small boy named Leo struggle to keep up with the others on the playground. Leo was new to my class, a quiet, watchful child who was behind in his reading. I'd been spending extra time with him, and I was starting to see a flicker of confidence in his eyes. "Family stuff," I added with a sigh. David nodded knowingly. "The worst kind of stuff. Just remember, you don't owe anyone a piece of your future. You get to build that one yourself." He smiled, then jogged over to mediate a heated dispute over a red rubber ball, leaving me with his quiet words of wisdom. He didn't know the details, but he didn't need to. He saw me as a person, not a solution to someone else's problem. Later that afternoon, as I was packing my bag to go home, I had a visitor. It was Mrs. Gable, the mother of one of my most challenging students. She was a woman who sent no fewer than 3 emails a day, questioning everything from my curriculum choices to the brand of hand soap in the classroom. "Ms. Miller," she said, her arms crossed. "I need to talk to you about the art project from yesterday. Jessica said you told her tree was realistic enough. I said that the brown and green paints were for the trees and that the purple was for the flowers," I explained patiently, for what felt like the 100th time that school year. "I was just trying to help her follow the instructions." "You're stifling her creativity," Mrs. Gable insisted. "She's a free spirit. You can't put her in a box." The conversation went on for another 10 minutes, a circular, frustrating dance of semantics and perceived slights. In the past, it might have exhausted me. But today, after the battle with my family, dealing with Mrs. Gable felt like a walk in the park. This was a problem I could handle. It was professional, impersonal. It wasn't an assault on my very being. As I was finally walking to my car, my phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number, but my gut told me to answer. "Lena, dear, it's your Aunt Carol," my mother's sister, the family's chief gossip and enforcer. My mother had called in reinforcements. "Hi, Aunt Carol," I said, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. "Your mother called me. She's so worried about you," she began, her voice dripping with concern that I knew was entirely fake. "And I heard about poor Clara. It's just terrible. When your mother told me about the wonderful, selfless thing you're considering doing for her." Well, I just burst into tears. It's the most beautiful gift I've ever heard of. So that was the new narrative. I wasn't being pressured. I was considering a selfless gift. "I haven't agreed to anything, Aunt Carol," I said firmly. "Oh, of course not, dear. You need to think it over," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "But it is your family, and Clara is your only sister. A woman's greatest calling is to be a mother." I'm sure you feel that too, even if you haven't been blessed with a husband yet. This is your chance to experience that miracle, in a way, to bring a child into this family that needs one so desperately. It's really the least you could do. We're all counting on you to do the right thing. The right thing. It was always about their definition of the right thing. I saw their strategy now, a coordinated, multi-pronged attack. My mother with the direct orders, Clara with the emotional blackmail, Mark with the reluctant plea, and now Aunt Carol with the appeal to a higher, holier sense of familial duty. They were closing ranks, leaving me with no room to breathe, no space to think. As I drove away from the school, from the one place where I felt competent and in control, I felt a fresh wave of anxiety wash over me. This was only the beginning. They weren't going to give up. And I had a terrifying feeling that this was going to get much uglier before it was over. The following week was a war of attrition fought over text messages and voicemails. My phone became a source of constant, low-grade dread. My mother left messages that swung wildly between tearful pleas and clipped, disappointed commands. I don't know how you can be so cold, Lena. I just pray you come to your senses before you tear this family apart. Clara's texts were a masterclass in passive aggression, filled with photos of adorable baby clothes she'd seen while shopping, captioned with sad face emojis. Thinking of what could be, she'd write. It was a relentless, coordinated siege on my peace of mind. I tried to build a wall around myself. I threw myself into my work, staying late to organize my classroom library and plan elaborate art projects. I spent hours helping Leo with his phonics, his small, triumphant smile when he sounded out a new word, a brief, shining moment of clarity in my chaotic inner world. This was real. This was meaningful. This was my contribution. Why couldn't they see that? One evening, I was grading papers when my phone rang. It was Mark. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. I was tired of hiding. "Hello, Mark," I said, my voice more weary than I intended. There was a pause on the other end, just the sound of his breathing. "Hi, Lena, Clara's not here, I wanted to call." "If this is about the baby," I began. "It is, but it isn't," he cut in quickly. He sounded exhausted. "Listen, I know we came on strong, I know it's a lot to ask, it's too much to ask." I sat up a little straighter. This was not the company line. "What are you saying, Mark?" "I'm saying. This whole situation is complicated," he said, his words careful and measured. "Clara gets very focused on things. She sees what she wants and she doesn't understand why everyone doesn't see it the same way. All I'm asking is that you try to be patient with her. And with me?" "Patient?" I asked, a bubble of incredulous laughter escaping my lips. "She's asking me to give her my body for 9 months and you want me to be patient?" "I know. I know it sounds crazy," he sighed, and for the first time I felt a sliver of pity for him. He was trapped too in his own way. I feel like I'm in the middle of a hurricane, Lena. I'm just trying to keep everything from blowing apart." "What does that even mean, Mark?" I pressed. "Are you having second thoughts about this?" "No, of course not. I want a baby more than anything," he said, but the denial was too quick, too loud. "I have to go, just think about what I said." "It's complicated." The line went dead, leaving me more confused than ever. It wasn't a plea or a demand. It was a warning. A hint that the pristine family portrait they were trying to paint had cracks just beneath the surface. The pressure, however, did not let up from other fronts. 2 days later, I ran into my mother's cousin, Donna, at the supermarket. She cornered me in the produce aisle, her shopping cart a formidable blockade. "Lena." "Just the person I wanted to see," she boomed, patting a cantaloupe with unnerving enthusiasm. "Your mother told me all about your family's little project. Isn't it wonderful?" "I wouldn't call it a project, Donna," I said through gritted teeth. "Oh, don't be so modest. It's a beautiful, selfless act," she gushed, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, when my Gary needed a kidney, his brother didn't even hesitate, stepped right up. That's what family does. We give pieces of ourselves to each other. Literally, in your case, you're a good girl for doing this, Lena, a real family woman." She patted my arm and pushed her cart away, leaving me standing by the avocados, fuming. She hadn't even asked me if I'd agreed. In the family narrative, my consent was a foregone conclusion. My body was a family resource, like a spare room or a pickup truck they could borrow for the weekend. The kidney analogy made me feel sick. Was that how they saw it? Simple organ donation? That night, unable to sleep, I found myself doing something I rarely did. I scrolled through Clara's social media feed. It was a curated fantasy of brunches, boutique shopping, and filtered selfies. Perfect couple photos with Mark, both of them smiling radiantly. Perfect shots of her perfect home. It was all designed to project an image of effortless success and happiness. Then I saw it. A post from 2 days ago. It was a short video clip of her in a fitness class. Not yoga or Pilates. It was one of those high-intensity, military-style boot camps. She was flipping a giant tire, her face contorted with effort, her perfectly toned muscles glistening with sweat. The caption read, "Pushing the limits. No pain, no gain. Gotta stay in fighting shape for the new contract. Model fit, no excuses." I stared at the screen, a strange coldness seeping into my veins. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. This wasn't the behavior of a woman heartbroken over her body's supposed failure. This wasn't a woman who had been through the emotional and physical wringer of infertility treatments, which I knew from friends were utterly draining. This was a woman singularly focused on the perfection of her own physique. I scrolled back, further and further, looking at her posts over the past few months, the period when she was supposedly receiving this devastating diagnosis. There were posts about a new, restrictive diet she was trying, a complaint about a friend's baby shower because the dessert table was a nightmare of temptation. A photo of her and Mark on a weekend getaway to a winery. There was no sadness. There was no hint of medical struggle. There was only Clara, her career, and her body. The word Mark had used echoed in my head. Complicated. It was more than complicated. It was a lie. I didn't know the shape or size of it yet, but I could feel it, a hollow space where the truth was supposed to be. They weren't just asking me to carry a child. They were asking me to participate in a deception. And suddenly, my fear and anxiety began to curdle into something else, something harder and sharper, suspicion. I wasn't just being pressured anymore. I was being played. The suspicion, once it took root, was a lens that changed the color of everything. I replayed conversations, re-examined expressions, and saw manipulation where I had once seen only family dysfunction. Clara's tears now looked like crocodile tears. My mother's worried sighs sounded like arias in a carefully orchestrated opera of guilt. The world hadn't changed, but my understanding of it had fractured. At school, the clarity of my purpose was a lifeline. David found me in the teacher's lounge, where I was staring into a cup of lukewarm tea. He sat down opposite me, his expression gentle. "You look like you're a million miles away," he said. "More like a million light years," I admitted. "Just family stuff. It's complicated." He nodded, taking a sip of his own coffee. "Tell me about it. When my wife and I were going through the adoption process for our son, her mother was a nightmare. She didn't understand why we wouldn't keep trying for a real baby, as if our Sam isn't real." He shook his head, a fond smile playing on his lips. "We had mountains of paperwork, psych evaluations, home studies. It was invasive and exhausting and the most stressful thing we've ever done. But every step of it was honest. We were fighting for our family. You just have to make sure whatever you're fighting for is real, you know?" His words struck a chord deep within me. Real. He and his wife had endured a grueling, honest process to build their family. What was my family doing? It felt like the opposite. A cheap, easy shortcut built on a foundation of lies. I didn't know the full extent of it yet, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it wasn't real. The call came that evening, just as I was settling down to try and lose myself in a book. It was my mother. "Lena, honey," she began, her voice sounding frail and thin. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm feeling a bit under the weather. Just a little dizzy spell. I don't want to worry your father. Could you possibly stop by? I think I just need to know someone else is in the house for a little while." It was a classic move, the manufactured crisis. My old self, the dutiful daughter, would have dropped everything and rushed over. The new me, the suspicious prosecutor, hesitated. But what if she was telling the truth? As much as she frustrated me, she was still my mother. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. When I arrived, the house was quiet. I found my mother not in her bed, but on the living room sofa, a magazine in her lap. She looked perfectly fine, and sitting in the armchair across from her, a picture of angelic concern, was Clara. It was a trap, an ambush disguised as a health scare. "Lena, you came," my mother said, her voice miraculously recovered. "Clara was just on her way out, but she stopped by to check on me." "Oh, I'm not leaving now that you're here," Clara said, smiling sweetly. "We were just talking about the most wonderful thing. Mark's firm is designing a new community center with a daycare, and they were talking about naming the infant room after the primary donor. Can you imagine? A whole room of babies, and one of them could be ours." They were tag-teaming me, painting a beautiful future that hinged entirely on my cooperation. I felt a surge of hot, helpless anger. "Mom, you said you were dizzy," I said, keeping my voice level. "Oh, it comes and goes," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm feeling much better now that you're here. Lena, be a dear, could you get my purse from the hall table? My blood pressure cuff is in there. I should probably take a reading just to be safe. I turned and walked to the hallway, my movements stiff. I was a puppet, and they were pulling the strings. My mother's oversized leather handbag sat on the polished mahogany table. I unzipped the main compartment. Inside was the usual clutter: a wallet, a checkbook, a tube of lipstick, a tangle of keys, and a white business-sized envelope sticking out of a side pocket. The letterhead was from the Ohio Reproductive Health Center. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. My hands felt cold. This was it, I knew it. My mother and Clara were still talking in the living room, their voices a low, predatory murmur. I had to know. My fingers trembled as I slipped the single folded page from the envelope. It was a summary of a recent consultation. My eyes scanned the page, greedily devouring the black and white text. Patient name, Clara Bishop. Date of consultation, 3 months ago. Then, the paragraph that made the world tilt on its axis. Comprehensive hormonal panels, pelvic ultrasound, and hysterosalpingography reveal no physiological barriers to conception or gestation. Patient has been counseled on her excellent fertility status. Patient has expressed significant anxiety regarding the somatic and professional impact of a potential pregnancy, including weight gain, postural changes, and the necessity of a prolonged leave from her career. The decision to pursue surrogacy appears to be elective based on these non-medical considerations. Elective, not heartbreaking, not a tragedy, a choice, a lifestyle choice made to preserve her figure and her part-time modeling contract. I felt the blood drain from my face. The sheer, calculated audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They had invented a medical crisis, a deep, personal tragedy, and tried to leverage it to commandeer my body, my life. They had painted me as selfish for hesitating to fix a problem that didn't even exist. "Lena, did you find it, dear?" my mother called from the living room. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely refold the letter and slide it back into the envelope. I shoved it deep into the side pocket, then fumbled for the blood pressure cuff, my mind a screaming void. I walked back into the living room, my face a mask of stone. I placed the cuff on the coffee table. "Here it is," I said, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "Thank you, honey," my mother said, not looking up from her magazine. Now, as Clara was saying about the nursery, I couldn't breathe. The air in the room was thick with deceit. I looked from my smiling sister to my blithely manipulative mother, and for the first time in my life I didn't see family, I saw strangers. "I have to go," I said abruptly. "I just remembered something for work, an email I have to send." "But you just got here," Clara protested, her brow furrowing in a perfect pantomime of disappointment. "It can't wait," I said, already backing toward the door. "I'm sorry, Mom, I hope you feel better." I fled. I didn't just leave, I fled, stumbling out into the cool night air, gasping for breath as if I had been holding it for my entire life. I got into my car and locked the doors, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The letter, the words, elective, non-medical. It wasn't a request, it was a conspiracy, and I was the designated victim. The quiet rage that had been simmering for weeks now erupted into a cold, clear flame. The question was no longer what I was going to say to them. The question was how I was going to make them face the truth they had tried so hard to bury. The drive from my mother's house was a blur. The familiar streets were alien landscapes, the warm glow of streetlights sinister and cold. The letter was a brand on my memory, the clinical, damning words seared into my brain. Excellent fertility status. Elective, non-medical considerations. My family hadn't just lied to me, they had constructed an elaborate, fraudulent reality and tried to force me to live in it. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that it felt like a physical tearing inside my chest. I didn't go home. I couldn't bear the silence of my apartment, the space where I had spent weeks agonizing over a decision that was never mine to make in the first place. I drove straight to the one person I knew would understand the magnitude of this deception. I drove to Sarah's. I must have looked like a ghost when she opened the door because her normally witty greeting died on her lips. "Lena, what is it? What happened?" "They lied," I whispered, the words scraping my throat. "All of it. It was all a lie." I stumbled into her apartment and collapsed onto her sofa, the same way I had after the initial confrontation, but this time I wasn't just weary and pressured. I was vibrating with a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. I recounted the evening's events, the fake health scare, the ambush, my mother's purse, the letter. I recited the key phrases from memory, my voice shaking with the effort of keeping it steady. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression hardening from concern to a cold, controlled fury that mirrored my own. When I finished, she didn't say, "I told you so." She just got up, went to her kitchen, and poured 2 very generous glasses of whiskey. She handed one to me. "The monsters," she said, her voice a low growl. "The absolute premeditated grade A monsters. This isn't just a family squabble anymore, Lena. This is fraud, emotional, psychological, and medical fraud. They built a lie of that magnitude and tried to use it to coerce you into a life-altering medical procedure. I'm not just your friend right now, my inner lawyer is screaming." "What do I do?" I asked, the whiskey burning a welcome trail down my throat. "I want to scream at them. I want to throw that letter in their faces and watch them burn." "I know, and the caveman part of my brain wants you to do exactly that," she said, pacing in front of her fireplace. "But we have to be smart. Think about it. You found that letter by going through your mother's purse. What do you think will happen the second you mention it? They'll pivot. The conversation will no longer be about their lie. It will be about your violation of their privacy. You'll be the villain. The snooping, untrusting daughter who stole a private document. They will gaslight you into oblivion and you'll walk away feeling like you were in the wrong." She was right. It was exactly what they would do. They would twist it, spin it, and reframe the narrative until I was the bad guy. "So what's the alternative?" I asked. "Do I just let it go, pretend I don't know?" "Hell no," she said, stopping her pacing to look me directly in the eye. "You don't let it go, you arm yourself. You hold on to that information as your ace in the hole. You don't need to prove how you know, you just need to know it. When the time is right, you confront them, but not with an accusation they can deny. You confront them with a decision, a final, non-negotiable, irrevocable no. And when they push, when they start the guilt trip, you calmly dismantle them with the truth. You don't have to tell them about the letter. You just have to act with the certainty it gives you." Her words were a balm, turning my chaotic, white-hot rage into a focused, strategic resolve. She was right. An emotional explosion would only give them ammunition. A calm, cold refusal, backed by unshakable knowledge, was my only real power. I spent the night at Sarah's, sleeping in her guest room. It was a restless, dream-filled sleep, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a soldier preparing for battle. The next afternoon, as I was leaving my classroom, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Lena, it's Mark. Can you meet me? I need to talk to you. Alone, please." It was followed by the address of a quiet coffee shop on the other side of town. My heart rate quickened. This was it, the wild card. Sarah and I had discussed Mark, the strange cracks in his facade, his half-hearted pleas. I texted back a simple, "Okay, 30 minutes. The coffee shop was nearly empty. I saw him in a booth in the back corner, hunched over a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. He looked terrible. His face was pale and drawn, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for coming," he said as I slid into the booth. "What's this about, Mark?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. I wasn't going to show my hand. I was going to let him play his. He stared into his coffee cup for a long moment, as if searching for the right words. "I can't do it anymore, Lena," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. He looked up at me and his eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading shame. "I can't be a part of this lie." I stayed silent, waiting. "Clara, she can have kids," he blurted out, the words rushing out of him like a dam had broken. "There's nothing wrong with her. The doctors told us she was perfectly healthy. It was me, well, it was her. She doesn't want to be pregnant. She's terrified. She's obsessed with her body, her work. The idea of gaining weight, of getting stretch marks, of being out of commission for a few months to her, it's like a death sentence for her career, for her identity." He ran a shaky hand through his hair. "At first, I thought she'd get over it. We looked at the medical report together. I told her it was great news, but she just crumpled. She cried for days. Then she came up with this story, the infertility. She said it was the only way. The only way she could have a baby without destroying herself. So this was the whole ugly truth. It was even more pathetic than I had imagined." "And you went along with it?" I asked, my voice cold. "I didn't know what to do," he said, his voice cracking. "I love her. I tried to talk her out of it. I told her she was beautiful, that none of that mattered. I told her we could adopt. But she fixated on this, on you. She said it was the perfect solution. It keeps the bloodline pure," she said. "Like we're some kind of royalty." And then, he took a deep, shuddering breath. "And then she told me that if I didn't support her, if I didn't help her convince you, she'd leave me. She said I was choosing you over her, that I didn't care about her dreams. She was going to file for divorce." There it was, the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. He wasn't just a weak man, he was a hostage. Clara wasn't just manipulative, she was a tyrant. "I am so sorry, Lena," he said, his eyes welling with tears. I have sat at that dinner table and listened to them pressure you, and it has been eating me alive. I don't want a child this way. I don't want to build a family on a foundation of lies and manipulation and extortion. It's wrong. What we're doing to you is monstrous. I looked at the broken man in front of me. The anger I thought I would feel toward him wasn't there. In its place was a weary, profound pity. He was another casualty of my sister's suffocating narcissism. His confession didn't absolve him, but it did change things. He had finally, at great personal risk, chosen to do the right thing. He had handed me the one thing I didn't have, a witness. "Why are you telling me this now, Mark?" I asked quietly. "Because I saw your face last night at your mother's house," he said. "When you came back into the living room, something had changed. You looked at us and I knew you knew. I don't know how, but I knew, and I couldn't let you face them alone. I can't live like this anymore." I took a slow sip of the water the waitress had brought me. The ice was cold against my lips. Everything was sharp, clear. The path forward was no longer shrouded in fog. I knew what I had, and I knew what I had to do. "Thank you for telling me, Mark," I said, and I meant it. I slid out of the booth. "I know what I have to do now." He looked up at me, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to end it," I said. "All of it." I walked out of the coffee shop and into the afternoon sun, leaving him alone with his cold coffee and the ruins of his marriage. I felt no triumph, no joy, just the hard, heavy certainty of a battle that had to be fought and a war that was about to begin. I didn't wait for them to summon me again. I took control. The next morning, I called my mother. "I'd like to have a family meeting," I said, my voice even and calm. "Tonight, at your house. It's time to give you all my final answer." The silence on the other end was a testament to her surprise. I had never initiated a confrontation in my life. "Of course, dear," she finally said, a note of triumphant anticipation in her voice. She thought I was coming to capitulate. She was about to find out how wrong she was. When I walked through the door that evening, the scene was set just as I expected. My mother, my father, and Clara were arranged in the living room, a tribunal waiting for my surrender. To raise the stakes, they had even invited Aunt Carol, who sat perched on the edge of a wingback chair, her face a mask of pious concern. They saw themselves as a united front, an insurmountable wall of familial expectation. They didn't know their foundations were already rotten from the inside out. "Lena, thank you for coming," my mother began, gesturing to the empty armchair they had reserved for me, the hot seat. "We've all been so worried. We just want to hear what's in your heart." I remained standing. Looking at each of them in turn, I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, savoring the final seconds of their self-assured delusion. "I've given your request a great deal of thought," I began, my voice clear and steady, echoing slightly in the tense room. "I've considered it from every angle, and my answer is no." The word landed like a stone in a still pond. 4 faces registered 4 distinct stages of shock. "No," my mother repeated, as if she had never heard the word before. "That's right. No. I will not be your surrogate. Not now, not ever. The discussion is over." Clara was the first to recover, her shock melting into a familiar, wounded pout. "Lena, I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. I thought you loved me. This is my only dream. You're destroying my only dream." "A woman's greatest calling is to be a mother," Aunt Carol intoned, shaking her head sadly. "To deny your sister that miracle, it's just so unnatural." "It's selfish, is what it is," my mother snapped, her gentle facade crumbling to reveal the steel beneath. "After everything this family has given you, a roof over your head and education, we ask for one thing, one single, important thing, and you throw it back in our faces. What has gotten into you?" They were using the old playbook, the same tired weapons of guilt and shame, but the words that once bruised me now glanced off like pebbles against armor. "Nothing has gotten into me," I said calmly. "Something has gotten out of me, the belief that I owe any of you an apology for living my own life. This has nothing to do with selfishness and everything to do with the truth." "The truth?" Clara scoffed, a bitter edge to her voice. "The truth is that you're jealous. You have your little job and your little apartment, but you can't stand to see me happy, to see me have the one thing you don't, a complete family with a loving husband." There it was. The final, desperate insult from a cornered narcissist. It was the opening I had been waiting for. I took a step forward, my gaze locked on my sister. The room seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us. "You're right, Clara," I said, my voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. "Let's talk about the truth, not your version of it, the real one." I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Don't you?" I pressed on, relentless. "Let's talk about the Ohio Reproductive Health Center. Let's talk about your excellent fertility status. Let's talk about the fact that there are no physiological barriers to you having a child. None at all. A collective gasp went through the room. Aunt Carol's jaw dropped. My father looked utterly bewildered. My mother stared at Clara, her face a canvas of dawning horror. And Clara turned sheet white. "Let's talk about your non-medical considerations," I continued, quoting the letter I knew by heart. "Let's talk about your fear of weight gain, your modeling contract, your obsession with maintaining a perfect body. That's the real reason we're here, isn't it? Not because you can't have a baby, but because you won't. You manufactured a tragedy so you could rent my womb so you wouldn't have to get stretch marks." "That's a lie," Clara shrieked, jumping to her feet. "A vicious, horrible lie. How dare you, Mom, she's making it up." "Am I?" I asked, my voice still level, a chilling counterpoint to her hysteria. "Then why don't we call Mark? Let's get him on the phone right now and ask him. Let's ask him about the conversations you've had. Let's ask him about the ultimatum you gave him. Force your sister to carry our baby, or I'll file for divorce." Checkmate. The name, the ultimatum, it was a piece of information I could not possibly have unless it was true. The last vestiges of Clara's composure shattered. The carefully constructed mask of the tragic victim dissolved, revealing the raw, ugly face of a manipulator who had been caught. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. She was exposed, utterly and completely, in front of the audience she had so carefully cultivated. My mother sank back into the sofa cushions as if all the air had been forced from her lungs. "Clara, is this true?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me she's lying." But Clara couldn't. She could only stare at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. She had been beaten at her own game, and she would never forgive me for it. I looked around the room at the wreckage I had created. At my confused father, my horrified aunt, my devastated mother, and my silently screaming sister. I felt no satisfaction, no joy in my victory, just a profound, aching sadness for what my family had become. "I am done," I said, my voice resonating with finality. "I am done being your solution, your scapegoat, and your secret keeper. You wanted my body, you can't have it, but you can have your truth, and now you get to live with it." I turned my back on them, on the whole toxic, suffocating mess, and walked out the front door. I didn't run. I walked, my head held high, into the cool, clean air of the night. Behind me, I heard the first sounds of a family imploding, the raised voice of my mother, the choked sob of my sister. But I didn't look back. For the first time, I was walking toward my own future, not the one they had written for me. And for the first time, I was truly, completely free. The days that followed the explosion were strangely quiet. The constant barrage of texts and calls ceased. The oppressive weight of expectation that had been my constant companion for months simply vanished. It was a relief so profound it felt like a physical sensation, like I could finally take a full, deep breath. But the silence was also filled with grief. I had lost a sister, a mother, a father, or rather, I had lost the idea of who I thought they were. I had detonated a bomb in the heart of my family, and I now had to learn to live in the quiet crater left behind. Sarah was my rock. She brought over wine and takeout and let me talk or cry or just sit in silence. "They built the house of cards," she told me one night as we sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling below. "All you did was refuse to be one of the cards. It was always going to fall, Lena. You just chose the moment." The fallout was swift and devastating, filtering back to me in fragmented pieces. Aunt Carol, a masterful gossip, had apparently spread the story throughout the extended family, though her version painted Clara as a mentally fragile victim and me as a cruel, vindictive monster. Mark, true to his word, had moved out. Their divorce was proceeding, a quiet, bitter affair that signaled the end of their perfect, curated life. I heard from a cousin that my mother had taken to her bed, prostrated with grief over the schism in her family, while Clara refused to leave her house. They had retreated into their narrative of victimhood. I knew then that there would be no apologies, no reconciliation. They would never forgive me for holding up a mirror to their ugliness. It was a painful amputation, but I was surprised by how quickly the wound began to heal. Free from the constant drain of their drama, I felt a surge of energy, a clarity of purpose I hadn't realized I was missing. My simple life no longer felt like a pejorative. It felt like a foundation, a strong, solid place from which I could finally build something that was truly my own. One afternoon, sitting in my quiet, peaceful classroom after the children had gone home, David's words came back to me. "You get to build that one yourself." He and his wife had gone through an honest struggle to create their family. The thought, once a source of contrast and pain, now felt like an invitation. An idea began to take shape in my mind, a quiet whisper at first, that grew steadily louder until it was a clear, resounding bell. A few weeks later, I found myself in a different kind of office. It was bright and welcoming, filled with children's drawings. Across the desk sat a woman named Maria, a social worker with warm, intelligent eyes. I was there for my initial consultation about adoption. "So, Ms. Miller," Maria said, smiling, "tell me why you've decided to start this journey." The old Lena would have hesitated, would have felt the need to justify her single status, to explain away the absence of a husband. But the new Lena just smiled back. "I'm a teacher," I said, my voice filled with a confidence that felt brand new. "I spend my days helping children find their potential. I have a good home, a stable life, and more love to give than I know what to do with. I've always wanted to be a mother. I just realized I don't need anyone else's permission or participation to build my family." The process was long and intensive, just as David had described. There were mountains of paperwork, background checks, interviews, and home studies. It was invasive and demanding, but unlike the pressure from my family, none of it felt demeaning. Every question was designed to ensure the safety and well-being of a child. It was a process built on hope and responsibility, not on lies and coercion. It felt real. My friends rallied around me in a way my family never had. Sarah became my legal counsel, reading over every document. David and his wife took me out to dinner and shared stories of their own adoption journey, offering advice and encouragement. My colleagues threw me a pre-baby shower to help me gather supplies, celebrating my decision with a joy that was pure and uncomplicated. I was surrounded by my real family, the one I had chosen and that had chosen me back. 6 months later, Maria called me into her office. On her desk was a thick file. "I have someone I'd like you to meet," she said, her smile gentle. She opened the file, and I saw a photograph of a small, solemn-faced boy with big brown eyes. His name was Leo. He was 7 years old, quiet and watchful, and he was behind in his reading. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like the universe was winking at me. All those extra hours I had spent with the Leo in my classroom had been more than just teaching. They had been practice. They had been preparation for him. Driving home that day, his picture tucked safely in my bag, I thought about my sister. I hoped, with a distant, detached sort of pity, that she would one day find a happiness that wasn't dependent on a perfect reflection in the mirror. I thought about my mother, and I hoped she would learn that love is not a transaction. But mostly, I thought about the little boy whose world was about to merge with mine. I had once been told that my purpose was to give my family a child. They were wrong. My purpose was to build a home for a child who needed one. I was not a vessel for their legacy, but the architect of my own. I was creating a family not from obligation or blood, but from a conscious, deliberate, and joyful choice. I was proving that a woman's life is not a simple, empty container waiting to be filled by the demands of others. It is a story waiting to be written. And mine was just beginning.